Fantastic news. Okay. I wanted to introduce our talk today, which I've just been given an absolutely lovely introduction there. I will tell you a little bit more about the Culture Commons as we go. I'm here today not really to talk about an open research initiative, more to talk about all the different kinds of data that come into our team as part of the research culture and research development team, and how we try to be open in our practices around that, and in particular, how we try to activate the data that exists within that system in order to make change. And I'll say a little bit more about what I mean as we go through today. But I think it's always useful to start with our roles and our positionality in this as well, so you can see where we're coming from, how the University of Glasgow is set up in terms of research culture, and understand a little bit more about why we'd be talking about the things that we are talking about today. So I'm going to ask Rachel if she'd like to just say hello first to you.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for having us. So I'm Rachel Herries, so I am lead the research culture team, and we deliver across 4 project work streams, and they are careers, research professional staff, research leaders development, and engagement, representation and recognition. And so those work streams all feed into the research culture priorities at the University of Glasgow.
Thanks, Rachel. And at the bottom of the slide here, you can see our 5 established culture priorities: career development, collegiality, research recognition, open research, of course, and research integrity. And then I lead the research culture and research development team, so working very much across the culture team, but also the development team, trying to understand the idea that if culture involves a change process, a learning process, the development team is what enables those, pedagogically enables that kind of learning to take place. So we take a focus on dialogue. We take a focus on the conversations that happen within the community. We look very much at mentoring relationships and how communities of peers can be embedded to take a more of a research ecosystem than an interventionist approach to what we're doing with culture at Glasgow. And again, I think through our examples, you might be able to see a little bit of that flavour coming through today. So we're kind of starting here with some points that I hope to be making as we go through and across the talk and across our slides today. So the idea that developing the research culture, or enhancing the research culture, however you want to think about it, is more than just making sure people know the rules. You know, policies exist, guidelines exist, the law exists, but it's not just about knowing. It's the process of taking that knowing and converting that into understanding, really internalizing what that means for you as a person operating within that ecosystem, being able to spot opportunities to have a go or to try things out and test those new behaviors, and then adopting those into regular practice. And I think as developers, as specialists, as people working in this area full time, we can sometimes be a bit inclined to see our role within this theory of change as being one of guidance or advising, or having the expertise that helps people translate what's in those policies into practice. And we can take this kind of standoffish training or teaching approach. The point I would like to give you today, and hope you would go away with if you just remember one thing about the talk today, is that our work generates so much data, so much feedback, different kinds of inputs, numerical data, the discussions we have, the stories we receive, the personal accounts, our own reflections, and all the different kinds of insights that we gather. We actually become the researchers. So I think what I'm here to say today is it's not just about telling people how to be open. We have to authentically live the idea of being open, a model being open from these specialist roles as well. And let me tell you more about what I mean. So if we're going with the idea that open research is not just something we advise on or enable, is something that we do and that we should model, I'm going to use 4 mini case studies today to look at this idea of opening up participation in and access to the research life cycle. And through that, show you how we try and make sure that everything that we receive, those stories, those narratives, those numerical data, are accessible, that they are shared rapidly and frequently, that we're transparent in how we do things and where the data goes, and how we enable people to have that trust in us, and that we act with integrity. Make sure we have, I know that UKRI like to say value for money. I like to think of it as value for people's time in engaging with us, and you'll see what I mean by that. I would like to discuss with you today really the ways which I think about activating the data. So we receive lots of data, lots comes in, as I'm sure you'll experience as well. I bet that can be quite passive. It can be data that sits there and we don't do anything with it unless we think about how the actual steps and processes we take to make that data active into something that can react and make change within the environment. And really, we're here to ask you, I love that I've gone 1, 2, 4, 3 there, that's me all over, how we can develop our practice further and get your feedback and your ideas and your discussion today as part of living the idea of the open life and sharing what we do with you. So looking at the kinds of data that come into the team, and there'll be and more in this. So please feel free to sort of react as we go, to share things in the chat, to make different points and to add to the discussion as we go today. So we've got data coming in about the culture or the cultures of an organisation overall. So I'm thinking of things here like culture benchmarking surveys that have sprung up across the sector and have happened in a few places. Glasgow ran one in 2019 and then in 2021 that kind of tell you certain things about the specific aspects of the culture that we want to note or measure or benchmark against. There's other things that we run. Consultations. So I'm thinking of things that we have made a methodological decision on, methodological design on, intentional ways that we've set up community consultations to collect data, and that might be to inform the priorities that we take or to create an action plan around culture, or it might be to help us design specific programs or systems or technologies that we need to be able to operate within this space. And then we've got other intentional data that we would collect, so specific initiatives or interventions that we would apply. So these might be problem-driven, hypothesis-driven, culture change initiatives. So we do some sort of project or intervention, and then we evaluate, what was people's experience of this? What did they learn from this? How did they change their behaviour? And what were the eventual outcomes or impact from that? And you'll recognise that as being the Kirkpatrick model of evaluation. Could use that. And then we kind of get into the messier data, the data that's around us all of the time, and the stuff that I really think needs activating. These jigsaw puzzle pieces, different kinds of numbers that come our way that are adjacent to the research culture. They might be incomplete data sets. There might be things we receive only occasionally or sporadically. And there might be data that we would challenge as being not quite representative or not complete or not the full picture. And things like this can be staff experience surveys, really abstracted demographic data that's held on staff records. It can be data with regard to funding allocations or places allocated to people on development programs or PGR applications, for example. So the data that nobody asked for, yet that exists kind of in and around everything we do all the time, and we feel we should do something with, but because it doesn't have a clear narrative, we're unsure what to do with that kind of culture data. And then there's stuff that always sits under that. Someone will always say, isn't this just anecdotal? So things like complaints. People say, I can't find this. Where is this? I want to report this kind of thing that's happening, And if anyone's read Sarah Ahmed's work on complaint as pedagogy and complaint as organisational learning, which is fantastic, and I would recommend it. And that kind of opens with the idea to be heard as complaining is not to be heard. And thinking from this standpoint of being open, hearing the data we've got and being able to activate the data we've got. I think it's important that we work with complaints and also that we work with people's observations, their reflections, whether they be developers or community members, different kinds of meta-analyses that go on. I'm thinking, if you think about things like your PGR conveners in different departments, what does that look like if we analyse the different ways they spend their time, the different kinds of things they're reacting to? So all these sources of data that we might not necessarily think of immediately, or that we might just end up kind of holding in a mental space to do something with at some point in the future. But if we want to join the dots, if we want to have a proactive approach to doing something differently in culture, I think it's important to see these pieces as data and to be able to activate them. But what will we do with all that data? We can certainly do things like ask, are we doing things right? And a culture survey or your kind of evaluation survey might tell us that we set out to do X, and the data that comes in will tell us if we're doing it right. And what I kind of want to focus on through the 4 case studies is not asking, are we doing things right, but asking, are we doing the right thing? And going back to this absolutely lovely piece of work that I hold in my head and my heart all the time, the idea of double loop learning, Chris Argyris's work, going one step further and saying, it's not just about doing the thing we're doing well, it's about asking if that's really still fit for purpose and if we're doing the right thing when we try and develop the culture. And I'm going to try and tell you a little bit more about how we see that and how we do that through these case studies. And I'm also going to try and bring this idea of activated data through. So if we look at the meanings of activate, to make something active, to make it operative, to make it useful, to convert it into a reactive form. But I think the third definition there is how I would think about it. How can we use what we've got, the data we've got, to initiate something, to cause something to start, to cause something to change, to cause something to stop, perhaps. What does it look like? How do we take it from data sitting in spreadsheets to something that we can use to make a case for change, that we can use to demonstrate an issue, and that we can use to activate something? So our 4 case studies are very, very concise because we want to be able to cover them. If you want to know more, there you'll find every 4th slide, there is a link embedded where you can read more on our blog about the specific thing I'm talking about. But then you can also email researchculture@glasgow.ac.uk if you want any specifics. And we are absolutely happy to share in detail anything we've done, how we've done it, forms, templates, everything. We are literally giving it away. So please do come and talk to us. So our first study is a campaign called People Make Research. And this is because the motto of Glasgow is People Make Glasgow. So the city of Glasgow, finds value in its people. The University of Glasgow also finds value in its people. And we wanted to go with this idea that the research experience, the quality of the research, the integrity of the research record is about the people in our university doing this work. And we wanted to recognise good practice in research leadership as a kind of kickback against a deficit model. We wanted to look at the people already doing really well, doing great things. So what we did was we emailed all PDRs, all research staff, and all research professional staff. So in that bracket, we would have research administrators, research managers, research librarians, research finance managers, project managers, everybody who's part of that ecosystem in a professional services role. And what we asked them to do was just write a short testimonial to nominate an academic. It might be their supervisor, their PI, their line manager, somebody that they work with in that ecosystem who is doing a great job and making a positive difference to the way research is done at the university. What we ended up with was lots and lots, about 250 100-word testimonials. So just short pieces of text saying, this person's done a great job and that really made me feel like, or that caused me to do, or an outcome of that was. So really absolutely heartwarming, beautiful testimonials to read about your research organisation. So we also had engagement data, who did the work of writing the nominations and who received those nominations. And we could look at, say, for example, we could look at that school by school, or we could look at that as a gender breakdown. So we got to understand where this idea of collegiality hotspots were. And we could roll that into the programme for next time, say we want to encourage more people from this area or more people who are men to write testimonials, for example. So we could kind of activate it in that way. But here are some other activations that we took to make that data useful and to help it make change. So we wrote thank you emails to everyone who was nominated. Now, this is a non-competitive process. There were no winners. We just said thank you to every single person who wrote the email and to every single person who took the time to thank somebody else. And we had our VP Research and Knowledge Exchange, Chris Pierce, write those emails and just note how important that work was. We took all those testimonials and we made them publicly available. So we made all this positive practice really, really visible. So if people didn't want to go to a workshop, for example, on how to be a better research leader, they could just quietly look and read those things without exposing themselves, without being visible in that area. They could just be incognito and read about good research practice in terms of research leadership. And then I sat down and I analysed all the themes that came out of those. And we've got 4 different themes coming out of what, at the grassroots level, researchers feel makes a positive research environment. And the opportunities we had then to make that change were firstly to challenge the awards model. It doesn't have to be about competitive awards for culture. We can recognise everybody's good practice and we can say thank you to everybody. We use those 4 themes to frame our PI development framework. So if we're wanting to develop the managers and researchers under the Concord Act, we've got those themes coming through that our researchers are saying important, and we can embed those straight back into practice. We used it in years 2 and 3 and onwards, particularly to look at research staff, research professional staff recognition, really trying to change the theme on whether they're included as research leaders, bring this idea of parity of esteem for us as research professionals with our academic staff, and their behaviour, their approach, their interaction with others, their collegiality being just as important. And then all of that became the basis of our Wellcome-funded institutional research culture project that we'll take forward with the universities of Edinburgh and St Andrews. We'll be running this campaign across all 3 universities, collecting more data, and our aim is to develop a new framework for collegial research leadership, which includes research professional staff at its core. So really the journey is going from something that looks for positive practice and is kind of a quick and easy win, nice thing to have, to actually creating some fundamental structural and systematic change through activating the data that came into our team. Switching gears now and showing you the second mini case study. It's a thesis mentoring program for very obvious reasons that you might have very quickly been able to imagine. So we're looking at PhD completion times and making sure that people complete within their funded period. And we're looking at the idea of where the stresses are, where the crunch points are, and trying to support good PGR mental health. So we paired PGRs who volunteered over 16 weeks, one-to-one, with a member of research staff, a postdoctoral researcher. And they sat down and over those 16 weeks, got support on their habits and practices of writing, their relationship with writing, how they were structuring and monitoring, tracking their writing. And we trained those research staff as mentors who were able to work right across disciplines. So it wasn't about the content of the thesis, more about the approach to writing. The data that came in, again, very much what you'd expect. We got the application data so we could see across the university who felt they were struggling and wanted to reach out, which kind of demographic of people felt that they needed most help with thesis support and were proactive enough to be able to fill in this form. At the end of the programme, we had the mentee evaluation forms that said what they got out of it, what they'd achieved, and how much impact it had had on them. But then here's where the data kind of got more fuzzy, that I started receiving lots of replies from mentors just saying, I've had a fantastic experience. I've really learned something through this. And, you know, a complete blind spot for me had been sending a form to the mentors to ask them what they got out of it as well. And I could have just at that point gone, okay, that's lovely. I'm glad everyone's had a great experience. But what I did was go and interview those mentors and say, actually, what happened here? What did you learn? How did your practice change? What have you learned about writing? What have you learned about supporting PGRs? Then I analysed those. And I wrote quite a few on my blog, Supervising PhDs. I wrote a few pieces about the kinds of contribution PGRs, postdocs make to supporting PGR writing. Now, what activating that data did was lead to a whole swathe of opportunities as people read about what we were doing, picked it up, wanted to do that for themselves. So it helped us not just at the universities that I worked with and for to look at the idea of the educational value of research staff as supervisors, getting them accredited as associate fellows of the HEA for the kinds of work they're doing, looking at how it impacts on their employability, their leadership skills, and how they articulate their time as mentors and what they learned about, say, motivating people, getting people unstuck. But it helped to put together this idea of the concept of associate supervision. What does it look like if you're not formally on a supervision team, but you're doing lots and lots of day-to-day supervision? And then working with UK CGE, we put in place a new award, the Recognised Associate Supervisor Award, which goes with their Recognised Supervisor Award. It's kind of a half award looking to recognise people like research professionals, our postdoctoral researchers, research technicians for the day-to-day supervision that they do. It led to lots of new thesis mentoring programmes across the UK. And it led to the idea of specific international writing support. So when I said we looked at who was asking for this, who was signing up for mentoring, it was our international researchers. So we were able to actually make a case for doing something specific for international researchers. So again, going from this idea of supporting PGRs to complete on time to creating a national level change in how postdocs can be recognised for the contribution that they make to supervision. It's data that we didn't go looking for, but that came to us, but that we had to activate to make this change. And I'm at this point going to hand over to Rachel to take us through case studies 3 and 4 and draw conclusions from that.
Thank you so much, Kay. So I'm going to talk through the next case study, which is the Research Culture Commons. And so the why behind this really is we wanted to create a community-owned space where anyone from the research ecosystem could engage and collectively work towards research culture enhancement. And so what is it? It's an online and a community, an on-campus community that has membership from across the university, but we have advocates, champions, our community co-leads who are there to work with us. And we've got about 100 community co-leads. And what we want this space to be doing is really being peer-led and recognising and championing good practice from across the university. So a space for conversations, resources, providing clarity and having difficult conversations, sharing opinions, so that there's a space for people to really come and connect about research culture in a whole variety of ways, regardless of kind of their experience of research culture. So the data that we get from this. So we've launched the Research Culture Commons just at the end of last year. And the data is that reaction to the launch. So actually what people were feeling with regards to actually the space being created, and then the membership numbers and the co-lead numbers and the pattern of interaction that we're getting with the members that are coming into that community. We've also got the partnerships and connections that are made and that are kind of occurring from having that space be open and available to our community. And another data is the topics raised, the issues arising, and the complaints that are occurring. So we're the research culture team and the research and development team, we're kind of absorbing that information and utilising that data. So how are we kind of activating that, and what are we doing with that data? So providing the opportunity kind of for solutions and resources to be shared. So we've got groups that maybe have had similar problems, that maybe someone's a little bit further ahead, they've already got a solution, or they found themselves at the same kind of hurdle as other groups across the university, and they can work through those solutions together. That, like Kay mentioned previously, kind of that visibility of good practice, for those lurkers, people don't have to be, going to a workshop or engaging. They can be absorbing it and digesting it in their own time and then putting it into practice in their own time. And then kind of signposting and handing over processes, utilising that data and really closing that loop, that communication loop, and providing access and inclusivity for all. And so what the opportunities that have really been generated from the Research Culture Commons are this kind of broadening of our membership for the Lab for Academic Culture, which is kind of this space where we're bringing in different expertise and leads from across the university to kind of work towards that culture enhancement. We've got specific working groups on things like DORA or inclusive peer review and our research staff experience, where we can have the key leads and the key conversations all happening within these working groups. And then one of the opportunities that I think is really key is providing that clarity around communication, around the difference between organisational culture and research culture. And I've just got a diagram here to help you visualise that by what we mean. And I think this is one of the really important messages that's really helped at Glasgow get people to understand what we mean by culture. So we've got the research culture priorities, like Kay mentioned at the start: recognition, open research, careers, collegiality, and research integrity. And they are feeding into the research strategy. But broader than that, across the university, we've got organisational culture, and we've got our colleagues who are the leads and have responsibility for things like bullying and harassment, the wellbeing strategy, the staff engagement survey, promotions, pay and reward. And so we've got our partners and our allies who have that ownership and the responsibility for these elements. And those organisational culture elements with our research culture priorities all connect together with the estate strategy, for example, and the innovation strategy to make the research environment. So it's kind of showcasing that research culture is just one element of the wider university organisational culture at Glasgow. And while we kind of adhere to and advocate for some of those elements within, you know, for example, equality, diversity and inclusion, we are not the owners of that. We've got our partners who are the owners and the experts in that. And so it's about how we make sure that our community are aware of who is the right person to go to support, who is the right person to kind of take forward an initiative or to deal with a complaint, for example. So this for me has been game changing in terms of sharing that and that clarity across the university. So on to our final case study, which is our Auditorium blog. So the why behind this is we wanted to have an avenue for sharing knowledge exchange and providing a space for us to reflect on our practice and put that open out into the community for sharing and discussion. So it's a collaborative WordPress space, the auditorium being the fact that you know, we want to get our voice out there and kind of amplify it into the sector. So our team use this as a space to communicate our expertise and our opinions and our updates on our initiatives and our work, and invite the sector for feedback. We have an on-demand, stable, shareable link so that it's accessible to the community, and it's not just kind of, it's a narrative around pieces of information and our work. And so it kind of provides that story for people to actually pick up and utilize in their own space. So the data that's generated from our blog, maybe the most obvious ones are, you know, actually the number of blog posts that we have, and maybe the themes across the blog posts, and then the engagement with those posts. So the post reads, the subscriptions, the likes, the shares, and then the comments and discussions both within the blog space, but also kind of in the spaces where we share it. So for example, if we're sharing it in LinkedIn, and the traffic that it generates there and the discussion that it generates there. But that activation of this data and kind of what that data can be used to make change, firstly, for me within my team and across a wider team, is actually prioritizing and making space for the data that we have for our initiatives or within our work to actually be analysed to meet the requirements of a blog deadline, for example. So rather than knowing that we have data there and kind of saying, but I'm going to leave that to the side, actually sharing it at the point that we have it and that we observe it, so that we can then incorporate that into our working practice. And I think that's something that across our team we're developing, and it's really good. It's kind of good workflow practice, if you like. And what that's doing is it's enabling us to have open and rapid sharing of all aspects of our project. So the design, the evaluation, not just celebrating at the end via a blog post. Again, it's that visibility of best practice and really allowing someone to see all stages and our opinions through the blog posts. We utilise them in our flipped learning workshops with our research leaders. And again, we can't cover everything here, but if you want to know more about that, then please do get in touch and we can discuss kind of that approach to our workshops with our research leaders. It's that on-demand sharing, but really importantly, that openness and sharing of the data and utilising the data is building that trust in our team, the credibility, and showcasing how we work, why we are approaching things the way we are, why we are prioritising things the way we are, and really having that open to our colleagues and our community at Glasgow, but also the wider sector. And the opportunities that creates is changing practice and terminology, but, you know, opportunities to lead and contribute to book chapters, journal articles, presentations and keynotes. So yeah, really useful sharing just what our team's doing, what our team's about, and our values. So please do go and have a read. So those are our 4 case studies. And just moving on to kind of conclude here is really to encourage you to think about how it started and how it's going. So in pursuit of your destination, activate the data along the way. So this might be, for example, with a project, and kind of what Kay mentioned there about the thesis mentoring, thinking about what are the data points that you could have? What are the points where you might have some data, full data sets, partial data, and what could you be doing? How could you be analysing that just to take stock at that moment in time, maybe to evolve a project, maybe to just adapt it based on the data that you have. So rather than waiting until that final evaluation data, actually, what are the points that you could be consulting further or sharing for further analysis? And I think that's really important, kind of to just be looking at it as a whole journey instead of it being that final data is only something that you're going to get once the piece is finished. So just to kind of come to some conclusions, why are we activating data? So and what is it for? So building awareness of what counts as data. So really broadening actually what people consider as data, and how the format of the data needs to be, and how it can be used to kind of make changes and be utilised really as that evidence. Building visibility, activating qualitative data can increase the visibility and the utility of the good and the bad practices. So actually sharing the whole story, and kind of visibility of us as data users, that we actually do have data that we can analyse and share and build upon. Building narratives for change, so that kind of the data that might be sitting there that we're not doing anything with, kind of actually writing a report around it, analysing, thinking about what is that data telling us, what's the story that data is telling us, and to help us do the right thing, to help us consider what is the right approach here, how should we be building our kind of research culture enhancement projects forward. Building that trust, so again, kind of that transparency of outcomes and processes helps us to build trust with our community that we support and our colleagues. So again, the why we are approaching something, why we are prioritising something, and that data might be, we might have data to evidence why we're taking that approach or why we are prioritising something. And so that trust, that credibility, and showcasing what we value. And then building boundaries. So this and handover points. So this kind of goes back to that research culture, organisational culture, and research environment slide. So what are the things that we lead on that we are responsible for, and areas of the action that we own, and what are areas that we advocate for? And so handing over to the right person. So the handing over to the person that has the expertise or that can actually fix the problem. And so having those boundaries and discussing within your teams, what are your priorities, what are your boundaries, and making sure that everyone's on the same page with that, I think is something that we can be looking at. So just a couple of final slides. So one thing I would be asking, and Kay and I wanted to be asking you, is, are we open? Kind of, you tell us. So how can we be better? What have we missed here in terms of how we are looking at our data and how we are being open with our data? So what more should we be considering to increase accessibility, rapidity, transparency, integrity, and value for money with regards our data? So things that are on our mind across our team and that we are considering and that we really welcome your thoughts on are kind of the value for volunteered time as collegial community members, taking carriage of data sharing and handover, reducing our biases about our own work. So hearing the feedback, what else could we be doing? Acting ethically, so being clear about consent and sharing, doing the hard work as well as the easy work. So how are you approaching that? How are you prioritising that? And that closing the loop and communicating progress. So doing that full picture. So we really do welcome your thoughts and your feedback on that in the discussion that we can have. So finally, to wrap up, so we've heard kind of how we're approaching activating our data across the research culture and researcher development team. So recommendations we would make to you are to give yourself time with your data to analyze and write. So give permission to yourself and your teams to actually build that into your work stream, and make space for that data when you're at the different touch points. Really define priorities and boundaries and build those partnerships with your allies, so you know when to hand over, and that can build trust and clarity with the community as well about who is the right person to go to, who's the right team, and that's going to just help streamline and also, you know, improve our practice across our ecosystem. Really, I think the Research Culture Commons is a really good example of this, but so are so many of our other initiatives. Your community holds so much value, and there's so much great practice, great creative, innovative ideas going on that potentially we don't know about yet. So it's about us being the connector, but also activating our community stories and really making those connections, so that we can really showcase that we consider the work that they're doing to be really valuable, and to really create that connection and that space for people to come together and celebrate that, but also to create channels for complaint so that we can utilize that information and really showcase that we are listening and we are building that into our practice. And then finally, resisting the betterment drive. So look for what's already good, look for what already is excellent practice, and then as that kind of message is shared, expect to see some things get worse as awareness is raised of what is really good practice, and then the penny might be dropping about, maybe what I'm experiencing isn't the best it could be. So that obviously will give opportunities to give even more data there. So those are our kind of closing recommendations, if you like. But Kay and I would both really welcome a really open discussion with you about what data do you already have that you need time with, for you to, you know, how can you activate it and cause change to happen, and how can you create data flow through setting up collaborative processes with other university functions. So in addition to the question about what have we missed and how could we improve, or what are you doing that you think we could add to our kind of approach, these are some further questions for you. So thank you very much.